I'm on the far one. Oh, thanks. Okay. I guess that's not for me, huh? So what should we talk about tonight? So my name is Scott Lewis. I'm the CEO of the Voice of San Diego. This is
very echoing.
All right. What's that? Okay. My name is Scott Lewis. I am the CEO at the Voice of San Diego. This is a special night for us. Thank you all for coming. I wanted to first thank our sponsor for the event, the Wait Foundation. Please, let's hear it for the Wait Foundation. So the Wait Foundation is a global philanthropy specializing in public-private partnerships to restore ocean health. I also want to thank our many members out there. How many of you are members of Voice San Diego? Yes, you are now. Voice of San Diego is a member-based nonprofit, so that means that we only get to do this work because of people who pay for it, and those are our members. We have 2,000 members now, and 200 plus new ones for this event, so thank you all for joining. You're going to hear more about what it means to be a Voice of San Diego member at that point. Free admission to things like this that we do. We believe that journalism can be more than just a text. It can be more than just a broadcast. It can be more than just a dance. It can be more than an interview on TV. It can be an event. It can be a conversation. It can be an investigation. It can be all kinds of different things. And so this is one manifestation of that. I wanted to thank a couple of other people. First of all, our guests for coming. And let's just start with who they are. So first is Susan Gray Davis, professor at the University of Illinois. She is a former UC San Diego professor who wrote a book about SeaWorld's business model. And I'm delighted she made the trip. Thank you. And I want to thank SeaWorld for participating in this. They are perfectly capable of not commenting and not participating, and they chose to participate, and they brought some authentic people up with the knowledge of exactly what happens there. And so we will ask tough questions, and I'm sure that there will be tough responses on all sides, and I'm just glad that they participated. So thanks again. First, Todd Robeck, who first joined SeaWorld as a veterinarian and now leads breeding and reproduction programs at SeaWorld and Busch Gardens. Todd, thanks for joining. Christy Burtis is a senior animal trainer who has worked at SeaWorld San Diego for more than 26 years. Thank you for joining. And Naomi Rose. Naomi, thank you. Naomi actually went to SeaWorld today, right?
Yes, I did.
Naomi Rose is a marine mammal scientist with the Washington, D.C.-based Animal Welfare Institute. And again, thank you again to Susan and Naomi for making the trip. Again, this is a conversation. This is not a debate. There's no actual proposition that we're debating up or down. There's no, but that doesn't mean it won't have some interesting content and back and forth. I will ask that we be courteous. We understand you have a voice. Just be safe. Please don't try to hijack the conversation. We do have some security available. We're not going to go heavy-handed. We understand there's passions, there's feelings. If you feel like bellowing or something comes out, I kind of understand how that might happen. But again, if you try to take over the conversation or really stand up, we might have to control that. So that's the number to text for your questions. Obviously, we've gotten dozens already, and there's going to be more tonight. We will do our best to get through them and surface the best of them. And if you're on Twitter, the hashtag is SeaWorldChat. Hashtag SeaWorldChat. Okay. Did I forget anything, Mary? Oh, please, yes. I do want to thank Lisa. Oops, sorry. See, I'm an authentic guy too. I'd like to thank Lisa Halverstadt. Now, Lisa, a few months ago, she came to us and she said, I want to do quests where we go out and we try to learn as much as we can about a certain topic. And I think it would be a great way to really engage the public, to do investigation, but to also have short posts, long posts, even TV and radio about a topic, and really vet it out. We've done a few of them before. We did homelessness and other topics. And I was thinking, well, you know, really good idea might be SeaWorld. There seems to be a lot of interest in SeaWorld these days. And little did I know what we were getting ourselves into. Lisa has taken some flack from a lot of different sides, mean stuff, and it was from both sides. And every time it happened, she just got stronger and smarter. And I'm in awe of her and how she went through this. And I'm excited to be on stage with her. So my job will be to try to manage the conversation, to make sure people focus on what's been asked and what's been said. But then also, she's the brains and she has the facts and she's going to be running the main substance of it. So Lisa, thank you for doing this. Okay, without further ado, shall we begin?
Yes, we shall begin. So I would like to start actually by reading an excerpt of an op-ed that appeared in UT San Diego in March. And around this time, we were in the midst of a debate over whether there should be a state assembly bill that would have banned SeaWorld killer whale shows and breeding. So I'm going to read this quote here from the Vice President of Zoological Care at SeaWorld San Diego. Connecting people to animals is a powerful, proven way to promote wildlife conservation. But with that comes the obligation to provide these animals, who are ambassadors for their species, the best care possible. Todd or Christy, can you explain what an animal ambassador is?
Sure. Well, we're fortunate to care for many animals within our park. Is this on? Can you hear me? An ambassador is the animals that are in our care that we work with. People come into the park and they're able to connect with the animals in a way that makes them care about animals in the wild. So I'm like you. I love to see animals in the wild. I'm fascinated when I see anything out in the wild. But there's a difference to me between the animals in the wild and the animals that I've made a connection and a strong relationship to at the park. So when people come in and they have that relationship with those animals, I feel it does make them care for the animals out in the wild. So our animals serve as ambassadors for all the animals out in the ocean.
Do you have any data about that impact, about those what that ambassadorship achieves?
Oh, absolutely, we have data. We have about 18 to 20 articles have been published in peer-reviewed journals since 1988, reinforcing the idea that zoos and aquariums do provide a positive experience, and that when guests leave the zoo or aquarium, that experience carries on. And we have a list of references if you need them for study later.
I am curious though, today's world is a little different than it was 50 years ago when SeaWorld was founded. Now we can get on the internet and we can watch a documentary about a killer whale, or we can read up, or even see live cams sometimes. How does that change the nature of this?
Well, I think it definitely makes it more accessible. There's a lot more information that's available for people out there. But again, there's a difference between watching something on TV, seeing a documentary, and the difference between coming into the park and making those connections and seeing what the animals are really all about.
So,
I am curious, Susan, given that you studied SeaWorld's business model, how much do you think that education about the animals was really central to what they were doing?
I found that was ambiguous in the study that I did. Certainly, SeaWorld's lease with the city of San Diego demands that there be some educational function for the use of the city land that it's on. And actually, this is a pretty unusual thing in theme park history. There really aren't very many that are on municipal land and that lease it. Most most theme parks are on privately owned property, and so they're not open to as much scrutiny or open to as much negotiation as to what would go on in them. But so there is this mandate that education be provided. I felt that although there really are tens of thousands of kids going through there on field trips every year, and there are other kinds of programs that are offered. The result of my study was that it was very closely tied to the marketing of the park itself. And so if I were to do this study again, I think I would try to find some science education experts who are independent to assess the educational impact.
What is the difference between education and marketing, though? I mean, if it's good education, it is fun, and that would have a marketing benefit, right?
I think good education is very open-ended and doesn't necessarily lead either to a purchase or a product. I mean, good education...
Oh, so that's what you mean, when it connects actually to a sale of some kind.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that was very clear that was happening in the 80s and 90s with education programs was that it was a way of exposing kids and their families to SeaWorld very early through the school system.
Now, Naomi, obviously, as you're kind of a star among the opponents of SeaWorld's decision to hold killer whales. Is there anything that this institution, this company could do, or what could it do for you guys to hold hands at a joint press conference and everything would be rosy from then on?
Well, I was just involved in a conversation that was actually based on that question. What common ground do we have, and how can we move forward into the 21st century and achieve what we're all interested in, which is protecting the ocean environment and the animals in it. And frankly, from my perspective, one of the first things SeaWorld could do would be to start telling the truth about these animals when they're in captivity. Leading back to what Susan just said, the fact is that accurate information on the impact of captivity on certain species at the park, primarily killer whales, would not serve their corporate narrative. And as a killer whale biologist, that is more even sometimes than the welfare of these animals, which is severely impacted by being in confinement. It's the inaccurate information that is provided to the public in the form of education, in the guise of education, that it bothers me as a biologist, bothers me as a scientist, and it's starting to bother a lot of other scientists and biologists.
Well, let's try to vet those and get those out, but first, is there anything short of them getting rid of the killer whale program that would satisfy you, though?
I firmly believe that the welfare of these animals is severely compromised in captivity, so I'm afraid no. But I don't think that needs to be the end of SeaWorld. I have absolutely no interest in closing SeaWorld down. I've got a lot of better things to do with my time.
Right, and I think we're going to get into that, is how do we even understand a SeaWorld without orcas?
Right.
But let's try to surface these things. You've talked about this inaccuracy. What's the top inaccuracy that these guys can respond to?
Well, I think there'll be questions about this, but I'll just bring one up because I think it's really visual and really easy for people to understand. The collapsed dorsal fin that these animals experience in captivity, that's not a sign of anything other than gravity. It's not necessarily a sign of illness or injury or lack of welfare, but it is very much a factor of captivity. When they are in the wild, only 1% to 5% of the adult males in the wild have this phenomenon, and it's usually the result of an injury or an illness. In captivity, 100% of the males, the adult males, have collapsed dorsal fin syndrome, if you want to call it that. So if they were just honest about that it is a function of the fact that they spend so much time at the surface of the water and gravity eventually causes it to grow that way, that's one thing. That's honesty, that's accuracy, and that's what education should be based on.
The collapsed dorsal fin then just means that they're on the surface of the water. It doesn't mean they're depressed or that they're hurting.
No, it is absolutely no reflection of anything but gravity.
Do you want to respond about the thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's right. It's not a health issue whatsoever. It has to do with the way adult males get huge dorsal fins. And their lifestyle is really what we're talking about. I mean, when in zoos and aquariums, their lifestyle is not the same that they're going to have in the wild. There's absolutely no way that you could replicate that. But it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's different. There is no health issues with the collapsed dorsal fin. There's maybe an aesthetic issue, and it may offend Dr. Rose because she's seen killer whales in the wild. I have also seen killer whales in the wild, but it's not a health or welfare issue. And I know that recently Dr. Visser was offended by an inaccurate quote about location of the collapsed dorsal fin in the New Zealand pod of killer whales. But the actual quote wasn't inaccurate. It was 23% had bent, collapsing, or collapsed. That was the quote. Now, that quote is exactly from her paper, and I can read it to you. It was misleading. I will give you that. You are right. It's less than 1% of adult males in the wild have collapsed dorsal fin. Dr. Dold, our corporate in charge of veterinary medicine, did an interview recently, which I happened to hear, and he says the same thing I just said, that it's not a health issue, it's a lifestyle issue. Killer whales are interacting with their pod members, and who are their pod members? They're their other whales, and they're their trainers. They spend more time at the surface. The dorsal fin is made of cartilage. It's made of fibrous connective tissue. There's no muscle control of it. As it heats up, it gets soft, and then you get a damage to the microfractures in the cartilage, and as it gets older and older, the fin begins to bend. It's like a tree, that you blow wind on constantly. It'll go over eventually. It does happen. It's a lifestyle issue. It's not a welfare issue. As a veterinarian who's been practicing for, since '92, which is, I can't know how many years, working with marine mammals since 1983, animal health, welfare is my expertise, and it's not a welfare issue. It is an aesthetic issue, I'll give you that.
So why is it so important?
No, I mean, I totally disagree with them. I mean, I don't think it is a reflection of welfare, but that doesn't mean it isn't related to welfare, because they do spend so much time at the surface. This is the result. It's not a natural phenomenon. And so it's sort of a reflection, a symptom, if you will, of a larger welfare problem, which is that their lifestyle, animals don't actually have lifestyles, they have natural history, but their life history has changed so radically in captivity that this sort of thing can happen. And incidentally, can I just ask for a clarifying point? Todd, did you say that there is cartilage in the dorsal fin?
It's fibrous connective tissue, yes.
Yeah, but it's not cartilage.
Yes.
There's no cartilage in the dorsal fin. So, it does need the water column to hold it up to grow, which is what they have in the wild. They're below the surface most of their life, and the water column helps support it as it grows. And they do not have that in captivity because everything about what's important to them is reversed.
Okay. So your point, you're just trying
It's
to highlight
up above the
how
surface instead of below the surface.
It's a true physical manifestation of being captive, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So let's just, since we dove into captivity, I'm going to do this, and then we've got into one part of that. Let's just talk about this issue. This is at the heart of everything. When I talk to friends who are upset about this, when I talk to the activists who are upset about it, they take on they have such an empathy for these whales that it's almost as though they're human or even more sensitive than human, and that seeing some sort of show like this is like watching a prisoner who doesn't deserve to be there in there. What are they not getting, in your opinion? What do they not understand when they make that point?
Well, I think there's a big disconnect between how our animals are cared for, and it seems like just recently people have started questioning and really wondering, okay, well, what is the purpose for animals in zoos and aquariums? As you mentioned, I've worked at SeaWorld for 26 years, and in that time, I've been fortunate to work with many different species of animals, and whether it's a bird or a killer whale, these animals are educating. They're people that come through our park every day that have opportunities to experience these animals that they would not get. And because they have those experiences, they are likely to go out and hopefully get a job caring for animals or affecting the animals in the wild.
But is it really about all animals, or is it about killer whales?
Well, for me, it's about all animals. I'm at SeaWorld, I take care of all the animals at the park. And yes, I'm currently working with the killer whales, but There's no difference with, I'm honored to represent thousands of zoological employees from not just SeaWorld, but from around the world, that this is our passion. This is what, I've done most of my life. And, when you make comments about, forced to do something, we use a very positive training method with the animals. The animals have the choice whether to participate or not to participate. And I think the shows it's what you experience. That's what the guests experience most of the time, is the shows. So yes, there's a lot of other opportunities in the park, but I think the shows have become this, big discussion of the killer whales, and it's how you experience the animals, and it's how you gain a connection with them.
Well, the shows are more important than just audience participation or experience, right? The shows are an important part of the animals' interaction. It's an opportunity for them to interact with trainers from a challenging standpoint, have games to play. It's a physical activity. These sort of exercises are very important for their overall well-being. This is the same with the dolphins, with the killer whales. I mean, it's an important part of their overall health and well-being.
Well, we'll get back to the shows in a little bit, but I do want to point out that what happens is people are on social media. They've seen the movie Blackfish. They see pictures of these killer whales with sores and shaved down teeth. What are they missing? What do those photos not tell them that they should know about the care that SeaWorld's killer whales are receiving?
Well, what do you want to talk about? The sores, the shaved down teeth?
I guess
we
both.
can go through a list if you want.
What is someone to think if they see those
Well,
photos?
first of all, we can talk about, I'll flip a coin, the shaved down teeth, right?
Okay.
Dr. Rose is well aware that killer whales, there are many different types of killer whales in the wild. They're called ecotypes. And based on what their food preference is, it affects their teeth. Their teeth are very soft. They don't have the common enamel that you see on other animals. It's mainly of dentin. So it's a very soft structure. And so there are many ecotypes that have shaved down teeth as they get older and through their basic interaction with their prey. So I know that maybe most people don't necessarily believe me. So
Wish we could put that up on our PowerPoint.
well, whatever. This is a paper by John Ford. This is shaved down teeth of a wild killer whale. This is very common. Okay, Dr. Rose, you can talk about how it's an offshore, and you're absolutely right. It's one ecotype, and these feed on shark. Okay, there's no hiding of what's going on here. This is a North Atlantic type 1 killer whale, right? What do they feed on, Dr. Rose? Mackerel and herring, right? Exactly what our killer whales feed on. In fact, the study that this was done in by Foote, what he says about this is that
No, I've seen that thing.
I have the quote here. All adult specimens of type 1, these are North Atlantic killer whales, which is basically, they're what our killer whales are. They're from the North Atlantic. All type 1 specimens had significant tooth wear, indicating they share a common foraging method. And you can look at that since you have the question. And in addition to that, so we know they have soft teeth, right? So we know it's based on food preference. We know they can get worn down teeth commonly by eating herring and mackerel. We also give them toys. They have ropes to chew on, things to enhance their welfare and their environment, to challenge them, to stimulate them. They play with these things in the wild. They don't play with ropes in the wild unless someone throws them over the board, a boat. But they play with kelp. They play with other things. This is a natural behavior that we're interacting with them. These things with soft teeth, they will naturally wear down. So there is no issue here. This is a natural phenomenon that happens with killer whales in the wild and at SeaWorld.
Let's let Ms. Rose respond. So why is the teeth so important?
Well, I'm left with a bit of a conundrum here. I don't know how to respond to this without just saying that that's not a very accurate interpretation of the data.
I'm sorry, Dr. Rose, I have the papers right here.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to respond to you about those papers.
Yes.
The ecotype he was mentioning on the offshores, as he pointed out, as Todd pointed out, they feed on sharks. And that's, if you've ever touched a shark, you know that their skin is basically like sandpaper. So the fact that it wears down their teeth is not surprising, and also not a factor in captivity where they're not being fed sharks. In terms of the mackerel and the herring whales in the North Atlantic, their teeth are worn, but not down to the gums.
I guess you need to send her that picture over there, because it's pretty
Yeah,
much
I'd
down
love
to the gums. Go ahead.
They're not worn down to the gums. Their pulp is not exposed.
I'm sorry, Dr. Rose.
This is
sorry,
the kind
but
of debate that
I'm
is
sorry.
healthy in science. I mean, this
As a
is the kind of
veterinarian,
thing.
I can tell you that that's
Todd,
pulp
I won't
exposure.
interrupt you
Let's
if you
let her
don't
finish
interrupt
this
me.
point.
Okay, I'm sorry. Please, go ahead.
Right. So, this is the kind of debate that's healthy in science. We can debate exactly how worn these teeth are. But the fact is there are several animals in captivity whose teeth are worn down to the gums. It does become an issue. You have to irrigate the teeth on a daily basis. These are things that, of course, animals in the wild don't have trainers irrigating their teeth. So either this phenomenon in the wild, when it occurs, is not as severe, or if it is as severe, then it probably affects their health. And they probably have shorter lives. There are ecotypes that don't have the same lifespan as other ecotypes. What that tells me is that captivity is a habitat that results in health problems that may be affecting animals in the wild as well, but it is not something that should be occurring when they do have veterinary care and supposedly their welfare is being safeguarded.
So what is it for those of us who aren't steeped in these debates, what does it matter? What does it prove? Let's say
right. And again, Todd will dispute this, and I'm sorry about the he said, she said nature of this, but as I said, these debates are healthy in science. We are now, my colleagues and I are working on a paper to look at annual survivorship rates in captivity.
Right.
And basically, they are not comparable to the wild. They are lower values. Their mortality is higher in captivity than in the wild. And that is a reflection, very much a reflection of welfare. There's a lot of literature out there about how lifespan and longevity and survivorship is a reflection of welfare. When it's lower than it is in the wild, that's a reflection on welfare in captivity.
Now, is that a conclusion you've made after you've done the study? Have you done the study yet?
No, we're working on the analysis.
Just like the panelists need to give each other respect, let's give each other time to respond.
I told people I would say this if this occurred. I'm so grateful to you for that, because I was really hopeful that not my side would misbehave first. So thank you very much for that. So we are working on a paper for publication. We are very close to submitting it to a journal. And so these data are things that we've been working on since last year. And we presented it at a conference in December in New Zealand, and got some feedback that will be helpful to us in preparing the manuscript. And so what it shows is that survivorship in captivity is lower than it is in the wild. And that's why it's relevant, because I do think the dental health of these animals is a factor in their lower survivorship. It is a factor in their poorer welfare. And so I think it's highly relevant that this sort of phenomenon occurs.
Is it your contention, I'm sorry, just real quick.
You're really going to let me answer that, aren't you?
Yeah, but and let me add this. Is it really your contention that there's no health effects to being in captivity?
There are no health effects? You mean they're going to live forever?
No. I mean, is there more? Are they going to live less? Is there no negative pejorative effects?
My contention is that living in a zoo and aquarium is different than living in the wild. Okay. There are different pressures and experiences that every animal faces. But what's important is that to understand these animals have adapted well to this environment, and their longevity has been worse in the past, absolutely. But we have shown a steady increase in longevity of captive killer whales, and this poster right here is taken from the data from killer whales all over the world. It was at the conference you're at by Innes, right? And this shows the mean life expectancy starting dismally back in the past, going up blue for all zoologic aquariums. This red is a population of killer whales in the Indian Ocean, which is not doing well. This magenta, I don't know why I picked that, I can't say it, is a population, this is the combined northern and southern resident population survival rates. This black is the Norwegian adult animals, and this green is the southern Alaskan residents. So as you can see, and statistically, I can't say that we're doing better because we have small numbers, but empirically, there is, looks to me like fairly strong evidence that we are improving and we're at least as good as survival rates in the wild. If you
Well, I have
want.
a couple of responses to that. One
Sure.
is I would very much like you to submit that to a peer-reviewed journal for publication and
I'm
have
gonna
it be
do it at the
peer-reviewed.
same
I think
time
that
you
would
do.
be fabulous.
Yeah.
I'm hoping I beat you to it, but that would be the proper route to take rather than to hold up a chart like that.
Well, I agree, but this was
a venue like
presented at the
this.
Marine Mammal Conference, so this
No,
is
no,
data.
that work used a data set that was incomplete. And we've had long discussions with the author of that paper about the incomplete nature of her data set.
I think that's a fair
But
enough.
also, let me just say,
I think that's fair enough, Dr. Rose. But like you, I've been working with SeaWorld's data, too.
that's great. I just love this.
And this is a complete data set, and there are SeaWorld's animals. The same trend we're seeing, they're increasing. This is the northern southern residents, this is the
Right.
Norwegian whales, this is the southern Alaskan residents. They're not better, they're not worse statistically, and I appreciate
And I actually really do appreciate that graph because that's sort of what we found, that the southern Alaskan residents are still doing far better than the whales at SeaWorld, but that the SeaWorld curve has gone up. And I guess my point there is that that's a learning curve that that reflects mortality that shouldn't have occurred. This is an experiment, and those are your experimental results, and they are improving, and that's to be lauded. But the fact is that that curve represents a lot of animals that died that should not have died. And
I think the idea that we're experimenting on the animals is a little bit rough, right? I mean, evolution in knowledge and improvement in care, and I'm not that old. I may look old, but when you come into a career, you come into a situation, and everybody, this SeaWorld is committed to continually evaluating and improving the habitats, the lives of every animal at our park. And this is a testimony to the improvements we have made. And if you look at something as complicated and difficult to compare life expectancies, annual survival rates from wild and animals in zoos, it's a very complicated statistically to compare them. We have done that here, obviously. You can't expect changes to occur in a long-lived animal in a few years, right? If you were to smoke cigarettes today, you're not going to die tomorrow. So improvements and changes that improve habitats and lifestyle take years and years to end up in the results you're looking for.
Let me ask you just quickly, why, if they were to get that up to the even better, would it change your mind?
this has been 50 years worth of work. I would argue that if they haven't yet surpassed the longevity or the annual survivorship rates of a well-studied wild population that has extraordinarily high survivorship in the wild, in all of this rough and tough natural environment that SeaWorld often describes, they're doing extraordinarily well. You don't know from that graph, but those green squares, these animals survive like, like people do in Scandinavia. I mean, they have enormously robust constitutions. So if they can't get their animals after 50 years to that level at least, let alone beyond it, I've given them 50 years. I don't think I should give them any more. I don't think anybody should give them any more. These animals don't deserve it.
You're saying obviously SeaWorld was one of the first. SeaWorld was one of the first parks to house killer whales.
Yes.
We've had them for 50 years now in captivity.
Right.
Are there any benefits of captivity that you've seen? Have we learned anything? And I'm going to have Naomi start, and I know you guys have a lot to say.
One more comment about the wonderful graphs I made.
Okay,
because
but
I spent a lot of
Naomi
time on
is
them.
going to start.
Just for clarification, that top bar statistically is the same as the Southern Alaskan residents. There is no difference. They are essentially right now at that level.
And again, I would really love to see your statistics because
I
we're
have
working
them here
on that
with me,
right
actually. I
now.
brought them.
Just again, let me finish what
They're
I
very
said.
simple statistics.
We're working on that right now. We're talking to a lot of really good statisticians about it, and your data set isn't large enough to do a statistically valid test.
Well, it is, and here it is.
And I'd love to see it. And please do
Okay.
submit it for peer review because I'm not sure it'd make
Let's
it
get
through.
back to the question,
Yeah.
though. It was, has there been anything good that we've learned from captivity in the past 50 years?
Oh, absolutely. Back in the 60s, the situation was pretty grim for these animals. They were being shot at by fishermen. They were being, I beg your pardon? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, my mic is pretty low here. I'll speak up. Back in the 60s, these animals were being shot at by fishermen. They were believed to be, sort of ruthless, mindless killers. There was a situation up where I did my dissertation work where they were going to set up a machine gun and take them out. So I think when they were first brought into captivity, they were going to set up a machine gun and rat-a-tat-tat.
Who's they?
The government.
Oh.
Because that's how concerned they were about the depredations of this fearsome killer. And so definitely when they were first brought into captivity, it was a revelation that they were, they had a social nature and that they had a friendly nature and that they, had social bonds in their groups. And when they started doing in-depth work in the wild, we noticed that their family groups were finite, that there weren't thousands of them, there were only hundreds of them, and so on. And so I don't deny that there was a value initially, but I think very rapidly the work in the wild caught up, and we recognized things about their natural history and their culture and their physiology that by the 90s led us to believe as biologists that there were costs, heavy welfare costs, to having them in captivity. And now, 20 years from then, a lot of my colleagues are realizing it's time to stop this because, again, 50 years is plenty enough time to decide whether you can do this.
Well, Susan, you've studied SeaWorld as it grew over the last few decades. What emphasis has been on research? What did you understand about how big a deal that was for SeaWorld when it started, and what did your studies turn up?
My study turned up that the Marine Mammal Protection Act was what really forced SeaWorld to begin to emphasize what it called a research agenda. In other words, I think that
When was that act put into play?
1972.
72, I think, yeah. One of the things that it did was to sort of put this corporation on the defensive to show that it was doing something positive. And while I really don't want to take away from the intentions of the people who work at SeaWorld doing research and work with SeaWorld doing research, because I think that they're sincere. I think that this was more of a politically defensive move, as well as a kind of marketing move.
Help us understand, what did the law do that made SeaWorld change?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, it made it illegal to capture these animals in the wild.
That's not correct.
Right?
No,
am I not correct?
it regulated it so that if you were going to seek a permit to take these animals from the wild or to hold them in captivity, you needed an education and a conservation program.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is the exemption in the law that allows them to exist.
So one of SeaWorld's founders had been a marine biologist, and a small institute called Hubbs Institute was sort of added into or joined into SeaWorld at its beginning. And after 1972, I'm not so sure that they expanded the institute as much as they expanded the public's awareness of the institute. When I was looking at their publications in the 80s and 90s, it didn't seem to me that this was an especially robust or competitive research agenda.
You want to
What would
respond?
you say to that?
What is a competitive and robust research agenda?
Well, I think
That's my first question.
I would say very pressing questions. I mean, I saw, at least in the 80s and 90s, SeaWorld doing a lot of contract, sort of small level contract research. It wasn't like big questions were being, sort of big natural historical or big biological questions were being asked and answered.
I think that's, it's fair that you have that opinion, but research is not the, you don't go from one giant step to another. Research is the accumulation and the answers of important questions over time. Mm-hmm. And as they build up, you get more and more answers. Occasionally you get an Albert Einstein, but it's a natural progression of questions leading to more questions, leading to more questions. And that's the beauty of science, and it's a never-ending process. In that vein, we have published 50 articles in the last 50 years, peer-reviewed, so it's about one a year between all of our different organizations that are about only killer whales. If you look at the whole spectrum of all the animals we have and all the research we do, we put out about 40 articles and scientific discussions a year. We work with Hub SeaWorld and SeaWorld. We're partners in this quest to learn more, and we are dedicated to research. So,
but what big answers have you gotten over all that time? You say that it takes years and years to come up with those big answers.
What big answers? What's big enough for you?
Or what questions? What questions?
What is a big answer? We've learned
okay,
everything
forget
we know.
big.
Okay. I'll give you small then. First of all, when marine mammals were first brought into zoos and aquariums, they didn't even know they had echolocation. That's a pretty big one. Hearing thresholds, how the animals hear. That's
Help us understand echolocation.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's the ability to produce sound, have it bounce off an object, and have it return to the animal, and they can visualize their environment. Right? Like a bat does that too.
Yeah.
So just about everything we know about their physiology has come from animals in zoos and aquariums. Those are pretty big answers and pretty big questions. So we are working constantly on answering questions about, even recently, a metabolic study came out looking at the basal metabolic rate, which is important for wild animals also because that sort of gives the baseline for energetics and how much food they need. And when they have natural fluctuations in prey sources, how do we regulate fisheries? Sustainable fisheries are hugely important, especially with top predators like killer whales. So we are playing parts and roles in all of these big questions.
But one thing that's come up a lot when I was working on my quest and I talked about the research, I would get a few emails from people saying, well, if SeaWorld is studying captive killer whales and the killer whales that we want to conserve are in the wild, are they the same thing? Does that research necessarily all apply?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about.
It's a great question.
It's a great question, yes.
Nice work, Lisa.
It depends on what research we're talking about, right? I mean, if we're talking about behavioral studies, there's not a real direct correlation to wild animals, obviously. They're different habitats, they're different environments. But if we're talking about physiological studies, about how the animals function and interact with that environment, absolutely, everything that you learn does apply.
If you didn't do any research and you didn't...
Dr. Rose,
Can I just respond to that again? As a killer whale biologist, I think Todd and I sort of talk
you guys
somewhat
go
the same language. The study he's referring to about basal metabolic rate, has an N of 1, and I understand why it is something that they need to expand, and it was a note. It wasn't actually a peer-reviewed paper because it had an N of 1, and I'm hoping they're going to expand on it. I'm assuming that that's the intention. But again, I can only go back to the point that 50 papers in 50 years on killer whales, given that they've had the largest collection of killer whales over that time frame, and they currently have 29, and given that a single killer whale researcher in 20 years can put out 100 papers, that's not an impressive output for an institution with a very large collection of animals to which it has access. So, in fact, and again, I'm not actually discussing the rest of their output because they do have Hub's research and they do some legitimate work with other species, but when it comes to killer whales, their output has been, and I will use this word because, again, I'm speaking as a biologist, it has been pathetic.
What does the number of articles matter? I mean...
It is the metric by which, research, science, academia is measured. Ask Susan, she's still in academia. I mean, it is your research output that gives you credibility and legitimacy as a research institution. And again, for a facility to be in existence for 50 years and to produce on a single species, for which it has the largest collection, only 50 papers, that is not impressive.
Well,
What?
well,
Again, thank you. Thank you for misbehaving first. I produced 30. I'm not a research biologist.
We're not going to encourage bellowing questions, but that was a question that was on here. How many have you?
Yeah, I've produced 30, and I'm not even a field biologist anymore. I'm an animal advocate. And I haven't been doing it for 50 years. I'm only 50 years old,
Okay.
so I've only been doing it for 25.
So we have better access to the wild now. What questions do we need these captive whales to pursue now?
yeah, I think that's a great question. Let me just address a little bit about the research output, because it's a fair criticism. How effective are you? But you can't really compare the research that we do on physiology, which requires a large numbers of data points, which takes years to accumulate. Despite the fact that we have the largest collection, it's still a very small number. So, I mean, for instance, I published a paper on reproductive physiology in killer whales. It took me years, literally, to collect the data necessary to put together a peer-reviewed article that would be accepted in one of the top journals in reproductive sciences in this country. You cannot do quick, shoddy research and call it effective. So what we do is we try to put out everything we publish, and I've published over 40 peer-reviewed articles and journals personally. Everything we do is with the intent to do good science, good research that will get accepted in journals for peer review. The article that was a note was a peer review. That journal does review.
Absolutely.
Peer-reviewed note. You said it wasn't. So
No, I said it was a note, not a peer-reviewed paper. It was a peer-reviewed note.
Perfect. Okay, that's great. So, and it is an N of 1, absolutely. And these
Help us understand, what's an N of 1?
Sample
One
size
animal.
of one animal.
One animal. And what it does is it leaves the door open for an N of 10, and looking at young animals growing and adults and different sex ratios and how they affect throughout their lifetime. That's one study that absolutely needs to be done. An area that is sort of near and dear to me. I am a reproductive physiologist. I have a PhD in reproductive physiology. It is, I know surprising, is reproduction. And there are many aspects that our animals can provide that can be a model for animals in the wild. We have a healthy breeding population of animals, of killer whales. We've had 29 successful calves in a very short period of time, 25 years. And this population now represents we assume, a clean, as far as pollutants, population that now can be used as a model to reflect against some of the questions we're having to be asked about some of the animals in the wild that are the ecotypes, like the southern resident that are facing issues right now, and all killer whales, all large predators, frankly. What we have is a population that can be used as a model to ask important questions about how maybe these things are affecting their reproduction. It's critical.
Well, I have no doubt with this group that we'll have plenty of opportunities again to talk about research, but I want to make sure that we talk about the killer whale shows that have gotten so much attention recently. And SeaWorld has really argued a lot in recent years that the contact between humans and killer whales in the shows is really crucial. And I want to read a quote that caught my attention from an attorney who was arguing before a 3-judge panel in an OSHA case that came up after a trainer was killed in 2010. And he said, "It's 2020 hindsight engaged by the government to tell a company it cannot continue to offer its product. It's like if the government came in and told the NFL that close contact was banned." Can you explain that? That seems pretty bold. The NFL banning close contact being compared to killer whales and human contact.
Well, I think the contact issue is important, and it really stems back to research, and that is because of the relationships that we build with these animals, we are able to get much closer. You know, we've learned things that would be impossible to learn in the wild, and the things that we learn at SeaWorld are utilized by scientists in the wild to help the populations out there. Not to diverge off topic, but one thing that I wanted to mention, because you asked the question, you know, why have these animals in a zoological setting? And the fact is, we know how to better care for these animals than ever before. You know, we rescued 23,000 animals that, you know, this was due to human cause. Not all of them, but lack of fish in the ocean, pollutions, traumatic injuries that are caused. Because we have animals in our care, we know how to better care for them, not only nutritionally, but also through our great veterinary care. I was fortunate to work in the rescue rehab program. You know, we rescued and rehabilitated one of the largest marine mammals in the world. Her name was JJ gray whale. We were actually working with a common dolphin at the time, and I was there to see the veterinarians work with nutritionists and work with other veterinarians of other facilities to develop a formula that would help to sustain this animal so that she could be successfully returned to the ocean. So I just wanted to put that out there that, you know, there's a great benefit to what we do. Sorry I went out of order. The second part is because we have that close contact with the animals, that's how we're able to learn about them, to gain measurements. All this information helps scientists.
So being with the animal is help us understand the relationship you create with them, because there's so much talk about how much relationship you build, how much almost feelings you have for them, and the trainers really feel an empathy, like we talked about, almost friendship you talked about. But doesn't that also indicate that they are thinking and feeling beings behind that glass? Do you feel like they're aware of what they're doing? You said they make a choice to participate in these things. How do they make a choice?
Absolutely. Well, we use operant conditioning to work with them. We communicate through hand signals. I can ask a 10,000-pound killer whale to do something. He or she is either going to choose to participate or not. When we talk about the relationship, you know, I think that's a term that's sometimes difficult because, of course, we only know human relationships. But I like to describe it as it's a trust and respect.
Like a dog?
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you, when Blackfish, these other movies, they say that they're even more sensitive than humans somehow, that they maybe even have more cognizant thought, that they might be there more than even if a human was captive like that. What do you think when you hear that? What are they missing? What's wrong with that?
Well, I think it's a difficult question. You're trying to compare animals with humans. That, you know, that's the only thing that we have to compare is ourselves.
Do you want to?
I don't want to answer it.
Why?
I mean, it's a tough question. I mean, absolutely. It's, you know, comparing animal cognition, even within species, even within humans, we have a hard time defining that. Yeah, they're intelligent, wonderfully magnificent creatures. Are they going to be flying jet airplanes next week and doing calculus? Absolutely not.
Well,
I mean,
orchid might.
Maybe. So, I mean, the point is, we respect them as individuals because we know each and every one of them. You create a relationship with them because you spend your whole life working with them. You know, it's incredibly important that these animals are part of our family, and it's vice versa. Dr. Rose admits, too, they're part of their pod, right? This is their new environment, their new socialization. It's important. That bond is incredibly important for their welfare and lifestyle. And you know, how smart they are, you know, they're not rocket scientists, but they're intelligent animals and they deserve respect.
I want to come back to the shows, though, because I think that, you know, really any legislation and really most of the criticism is about the show, about the spectacle of a human being close to a killer whale, maybe riding on top of a killer whale. Why is that so important? Because really, when it gets down to it, I think that's what people get frustrated with, not the contact with the trainers. What is it about the show? Why is that contact in the shows so important? Why is this attorney fighting so hard for killer whales and humans to be able to perform together in the shows?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, you're saying it's so important. What I'm saying is this is one of many ways that we interact with these animals. And like I said before, it's because this is where our guests and the public, this is how they experience the killer whales. So it's what they know. You know, many of you out there, you don't see the work that Dr. Roback does. You don't see the work that other veterinarians do. You don't see the learning, the husbandry, that all this information that takes place, you know, behind the scenes. It's the shows of what you know. So, you know, myself as a trainer, the shows are one way for us to interact with the killer whales. And frankly, it's exciting. We respond from the audience gets us excited. Of course, the animals, I think, can feed off of that energy. So it's just one way that we interact with them. You know, people come up to me every single day and they ask, you know, how do I get your job? Well, people are asking this because they are inspired. They see something that's happening. They see that connection in the show. So I don't know too many jobs out there where people are asking, hey, how do you get a job writing for, you know, Voice of San Diego? You know, this...
All the time.
Actually, yeah. sorry.
Not as much as the animal
much.
trainer.
Sorry.
Snap. Wow.
Well, let me
my
ask
job,
Susan, you study, how important are the shows to SeaWorld's evolution as a company?
I think they're the key to the brand. I think the human-animal interaction is part of the brand that's been developed over 50 years. And I think, you know, one of the reasons people expect it is because it's been so central over, you know, up until pretty recently, up until the last couple of years. And it combines, it really expresses a lot of tension because it combines the fascination with these animals with an enthusiasm for very subtly, but not maybe so subtly, humans being in charge of the animals. So there's this big, beautiful, powerful, wild animal that is also being submissive or controlled by a human being. It's done in a very skillful, very artful way, but that's, I think, essentially what people are seeing in the shows. And it's very interesting to me that the trainers have, you know, not been able to be in the water since the OSHA decision. It shows that this brand, you know, can be forced to change.
Have you seen negative effects from that? Like on the health of the animal?
No, there's not any immediate negative effects. You know, it does limit the interactions you can do with the animals. It limits the, you know, one of the important things about being in the water with the animals is the fact they're used to that, right? It's part of their lifestyle. When they're with them in the water all the time, you know, that's part of what they want. So when you take that away from them, you're actually depriving them of something they're used to doing. I mean, a perfect example was Keiko. You know, when I was talking to a friend of mine.
Keiko, an orca.
Keiko is an orca, yeah. If you haven't heard of him, I won't describe any more to you than that. But Keiko was an animal that was in the Oregon State Aquarium for some time. And he was just an animal that had grew up with dolphins and humans. He didn't have another killer whale companion, but the interaction was everything to him. I was talking to a friend that was the curator at Oregon State Aquarium, and they got in the water with him every day. They're putting in toys. You know, one of his favorite games was to go out on a raft and have Keiko knock it over and turn it upside down. This human bond is incredibly important to these animals, and to take it away from them, certainly, I can't read their mind, and I haven't seen any changes in health parameters, but I would imagine that it would have an effect on it.
Yeah, so I want you to talk about
I have two comments. One is in response to what Christy said. I would hope that after a show, if it was really doing what SeaWorld claims it's doing and what we all hope it's doing, which is inspiring people to care more about the oceans, more about the animals in the oceans, that they would come up to her and say, how can I do more for the oceans? How can I do more for these animals out in the wild? The fact that they come up to her and say, how do I get your job? Means that they are in fact selling a product. The product is the bond, and in fact that is exactly what the attorney said in the OSHA hearing. She argued to the judge that what they are selling, and she used that word, what they are selling is the bond between the trainer and the whale, and to take it away, as Todd put it, by taking them out of the water is harming them materially. The judge didn't accept that argument and ruled against them, but that to me was an enormous admission that in fact they are not purveying education about conservation and helping these animals in the wild, but a purely captive element, which is this bond between trainer and whale. which I don't deny for a moment is real. It's clearly real. They are intelligent social animals. But that's not what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay, I want you to get to your next point.
I had a second
I know,
comment
I
on
want
that,
you to get to that. Don't forget that, but I do want them to respond to that. If you don't want to.
Well, I mean, you're presuming that people don't ask me that question. They, of course, ask the question about how they can help animals in the wild. And again, I can't emphasize enough, because people are coming in and experiencing what they experience at SeaWorld with the animals, I think it does make them care about animals in the wild. And we do a lot of outreach, a lot of education. And you can ask my daughters, my husband, I'm not just at work, but at home, recycling. And these things might seem small, but to me,
Oh, no, they're huge.
yeah, they're absolutely, they are huge.
And this is what I do as well. I mean, my job is to advocate for protection of these animals and protection of the ocean. And I don't have the reach by any means that SeaWorld does. SeaWorld has 24 million visitors a year, roughly, something like
You
that.
probably know better than me.
And my membership of my organization is, orders of magnitude smaller. So I work at conservation forums. I work at the International Whaling Commission. I work for, on CITES issues. I work with the marine noise issue. I work on regulating whale watching. And all I see, as SeaWorld itself often tells people, is that the situation's getting worse out there. It's getting worse out there. And so what I would argue, and I said this in a couple of forums recently, is that perhaps this old paradigm of having to watch a spectacular show to try to get inspired about conservation is part of the problem and not part of the solution, that this is an old paradigm that is not, in fact, being effective. And maybe we need to start thinking about new business models and new technologies and new ways of reaching people. And I'm talking about my own organization, my own field, my own community. We are also not being as effective as we need to be. And so we're trying to come up with new ways of getting our outreach, our message out there, and trying to be innovative. Clinging to an old business model is not innovative.
Excuse me, I'd like to comment on that. I wanted to say that.
Todd and then Susan.
I'm sorry, Susan.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
My whole career has been sort of propelled by my time as when I got to come down to San Diego SeaWorld and spend hours in front of the, at that time it was a petting pool, and at that time it was, bizarre. There was a killer whale, there was pilot whales, it was a totally different time. I loved it. I spent hours there, and that connection really affected me. And I didn't say that I wanted to be a trainer. I've always known I wanted to be a scientist. My parents are scientists, my grandmother's a scientist. There wasn't any kind of disconnect with that. It was, yes, I want to be a scientist, and this is amazing. These animals are incredible, and I want to be a part of doing something for them. And I think Dr. Rose had a similar experience. So I don't know that in your book you said you went to Marineland as a child.
After I decided I wanted to be a marine biologist,
Okay.
which I got from television.
Okay, that's great. I saw Jacques Cousteau too, and I loved it also, by the way. But the thing is, the shows don't just inspire you to want to be a trainer. They do inspire emotion. They do inspire you want to learn more about what you can do to help that species, whatever the show happens to be about. So, to Dr. Roy's point, we're always looking to improve our shows. It's not that we're static. I don't think we have the same show we've ever had. If you go in time back to the 80s, it's totally different. Fast forward. I mean, we're always looking to improve. We're always looking for ideas. And if you have ideas that are constructive, how we can do a better job of getting the message out, we're all welcome to hear them.
So I just wanted to point to what I think is kind of an interesting paradox or tension, which is that to the extent that exhibits and shows ask people to have feelings about these animals, I think people do have feelings about them. But one of the things that then happens is that those feelings aren't always entirely controllable. I mean, sometimes they turn into a feeling that the animal shouldn't be in captivity, right? So I think I'd like to actually point to SeaWorld's success in asking people to have emotions about, in this case, killer whales. I don't think that's always a a process that's very, easily directed in one particular direction. I think maybe some of the anti-captivity feeling is actually a result of the successful creation of feelings.
I agree 100%. I mean, the audience members here, the passion, the clapping for one side or the other, everybody here really has a lot in common. We all care about these animals, and we have different opinions about what's good for them or not. But the fact of the matter is, SeaWorld is effective at creating connections to these animals. We're not trying to control the connection. We're not trying to direct it one way or another. If you don't like it, fill out a review. Don't come back to SeaWorld. Give us some constructive criticism. But the bottom line is, everybody here is energized, not because of machine guns shooting at killer whales in the Pacific Northwest, but because killer whales were brought and we were all able to enjoy them and see them inspire us for the future.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, you can parry
Okay.
my question and say what you need to say,
Sure.
but do this real quick. The law that Assemblyman Bloom tried to pass would have gotten rid of the shows and would have demanded that SeaWorld take the orcas and put them in a sea pen. Now, to me, that kind of seemed like a red herring because as I look at land use issues in this state, I can't imagine a sea pen ever being approved. I can't imagine the physics, I can't imagine the engineering, I can't imagine the land use, I can't imagine the permitting. How is it not a red herring? How is it a real plausible potential?
We actually had a conversation with one of the California Coastal Commission members who came to the hearing, and she said she saw no reason why it couldn't be approved. There are sea pens in Florida. There are sea pens, in the Gulf of Mexico. There are sea pens all around the world for dolphins.
We must have got
Not for killer whales necessarily, but for dolphins. The engineering principles are established. They are successful with dolphins in certain areas. And I don't see, just as a logistical engineering matter, why they can't exist. In terms of whether they would ever exist, in terms of, SeaWorld ever cooperating in this is another question. But the main focus of the bill wasn't about sea pens. It was about stopping the breeding program and phasing the animals out. So in a way, your question is a red herring, because that wasn't the focus of the bill.
Well, no, but that's my point. That's what it's really about. It's just shutting
absolutely.
the program down.
Yeah.
It almost felt like you're putting the sea pens out, though, as okay, this is what we can do for now, even though it's not realistic. What could
No,
we do?
I honestly believe it would be better for their welfare to have more space and to be in natural seawater, in a natural environment, but still enclosed and still under human care, because that's very clear to me that many of these animals will never be able to be returned to the wild. There are some of my constituents out there who wouldn't necessarily agree with me. I'm just speaking purely as a biologist now. I don't think they could be successful.
Would they survive the sea pen? We must have got 50.
Again, I'll regret this till the day I die, but Keiko survived his transfer to the sea pen. The reason I say I'll regret that is to bring up Keiko in this environment. I mean, I've got people out there accusing me of killing Keiko. So I'm taking a huge risk by bringing him up instead of waiting for him to come up. But I'm just proactively telling you that he made that transfer to the sea pen without any problems at all.
All right, we're going to take text questions, but we have one more that we want to go.
Do I get to answer the sea pen issue?
Yeah, and then we'll do this one, and then we'll do text.
I think that SeaWorld is, just to clear it up, we're not interested in sea pens. Sea pens have a lot of issues with them. And one of the persons who actually worked with Keiko, he talks about the sea pen, and he claims it was probably one of the best sea pens you could create, and Dr. Rose can say yes or no to that. But so there are some problems with it. It's not without issues. And he talks about the anchors. When the sea pens move, the pen would have to would become unstable and start pulling apart. So sometimes they had to use daily adjustments with a tugboat to get the sea pens to stay in place. Another quote he said was that there's a huge amount of noise in the water around sea pens. When you... Was that a question or?
No.
All right, fair enough. I'll answer that and go to the next one. Animals live in the water. There is a water-air interface. We have hydrophones. We have looked at the ambient noise in our facilities. Fireworks do not affect the animals like a sea pen does.
All right.
Okay.
Let's finish this point and we'll get to...
That's a great question about the dogs. This is what Mark talked about with the noise. When you listen to the underwater noise from the pen with the hydrophone, it was like water torture. There was so much squeaking, grinding, friction, etc. We actually had to turn the hydrophone off, or it drove us crazy with constant noise. One more quote about sea pens is another person said, sea pens have their own unique problems, and their conditions can compromise the health of, even lead to the death of marine mammals kept within them. The problems listed were pollution, abnormally high levels of noise from boat traffic, also from reverberation off the shallow bottom, environmental damage, and susceptibility to hurricanes. That was from Dr. Rose in the case against marine mammals in captivity.
And can I say, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I do have concerns about sea pens. I don't think they are without problems. I think there are other significant problems in tanks. But I do hope you take those concerns to the U.S. Navy and tell them that these are concerns you have for their facility in San Diego. They have 70 dolphins in a sea pen, complex there that's right in the middle of the shipping lane, in and out of San Diego Harbor. What you just said there is absolutely a concern.
As soon as the U.S. Navy gets killer whales, we'll have that discussion.
They're dolphins.
Well, I thought we were talking about killer whales.
No, but we're talking about sea pens. We weren't talking about killer whale sea pens or dolphin sea pens.
So if you want to bring up dolphins, fair enough, and we can talk about dolphins if you guys are up to it.
No.
So.
We'd prefer to focus on killer whales.
Good man.
And actually, I have another question about the killer whales that comes up a lot, and this seems to be the thing that has resonated most with a lot of the people that I talk to. They're really concerned that after watching the movie, about this claim that moms and calves are separated. What's the reality there? Are mother killer whales and their calves being separated?
Well,
You want that one?
I did not come prepared. Where's my binder?
You can use one of his.
I haven't ever done a debate, so I know there's rules.
No, there's a rule. Mr. Robeck, by the way, Dr. Robeck is the head of breeding at SeaWorld.
Yeah, that's a fair question for me. So, first of all, we don't move dependent calves, okay? That's the first answer to that. And I think a lot of that...
At what point are they dependent?
When they're not nursing and required on their mom for their health and well-being, right? When they start interacting with other whales, when they start developing a social... When they start developing...
Let him talk.
The passion is amazing, thank you, okay? It's truly. When they start developing bonds with other animals where they indicate they have a social structure of their own. And I think part of the reason why we have a lot of animosity from at least persons in row 2, 3, and 8 is because of the information that we have, the most studied information, the Dr. Rose studies, the northern and southern residents. This is an ecotype of killer whales, and I think that for your benefit out there, because
I love it.
SeaWorld doesn't do enough education apparently, so I thought I would take this opportunity to talk about the wonderful world of killer whales, right? There are at least 10 different types of killer whales, at least, right? These are the ones that so far were available on the poster. At any rate, for this description of the animals in Pacific Northwest, they don't leave. They stay around with their pods their life. That is absolutely correct. But that's not the case for all the ecotypes out there. Here's a quote. Fair enough question. I've mentioned that before. Our majority is type 1, North Atlantic. Okay, that's the ecotype. So thank you for asking that. So this is about transients. Now, I please bear with me. This is a quote, so I'm going to read it. Obviously, otherwise there's no point in having a quote. Unlike residents, extended or permanent dispersal of transient offspring away from natal matrilines is common, with juveniles and adults of both sexes participating. It's from Ford and Ellis, Baird and Whitehead. Another quote about offshores. In offshores, or
Hey,
I want to express myself that I'm actually reading from scientific papers. So if you don't agree with me, talk to the authors of the paper, and you have that opportunity. So, offshores, another ecotype. Membership patterns within this group appear to be dynamic, with considerable interchange of animals noted. Now, why am I saying this? Okay, I'll get to the point eventually. So we have these different animals. What is apparent is these animals are genetically programmed for flexibility. They have different environments, different habitats, they have different niches, they have different prey sources, they have culture to help pass along these ideas. SeaWorld is a different environment, and our animals have adapted to it quite well. So that's the point.
I have never trained a killer whale in captivity. I've never been there when they have separated a calf from its mother, but I know people who were. And these are animals that, regardless of the type of dispersal patterns they exhibit, for example, transients, which were in the population, in the habitat I studied, there were the northern and southern resident killer whales, which is what Todd has been talking about, and then there were the transients, which he just did a quote on. These animals do disperse from their mothers. They do separate from her at about the age of 10, and then they periodically reunite with her. So they continue to remember their mother. They continue to associate with her for the rest of their lives, not right by their sides the way they do in the resident populations, but clearly they have lifelong family bonds and memories. So again, accepting the fact that it is a different habitat in captivity, I do not understand why more of an effort wouldn't be made to accommodate a natural history pattern that is apparent in several different ecotypes.
what would it matter? Would it be okay if they did?
Exhibit dispersal patterns?
If they preserve the bond to the level you think they should?
It would be an enormous step forward in improving their welfare, absolutely.
You still wouldn't think it was okay?
As I said, the proof is in the data. They don't live as long. Todd will dispute that, but my data show they don't live as long.
And
I'm going to put that through the peer-reviewed process.
And then at the heart of that concern is that if they're not living as long, if they're having emotional distress from being separated, then this is a cruel practice.
It's cruel, yeah.
Do you want to respond?
I think the assumption that is being made is that we don't take that into consideration. And we don't move calves. We have moved juveniles. There haven't been 12, which seems to be the magic cutoff. We do move animals that appear to be well-adjusted, have social connections that can handle the transportation, and we feel like, based on behavior and our expertise, they will integrate into the new situation. This is what we have done, and our animals are doing quite well.
Can I ask a specific question?
Yes.
Of me?
No, about a specific animal. So what was and I'm purely curious. This is not, I'm actually curious as a advocate and as a scientist.
You don't have
What were I'm not trying to, in other words, just be provocative. What were the criteria that you used when you sent Skyla to Loro Parque? She was less than 2.
No, I don't actually know if that's correct, that she was less than 2. We sent her to Laurel Park.
I don't have a binder, but I can look that up for you.
Yeah. Please get your smartphone.
I mean, she was, I believe she was 21 months.
Don't I get
22 months.
one call? I got to have a call to somebody.
I think that would be a great show. Go ahead.
please.
I don't care.
Well, let's concede the point and say she was 2.
She was more than 2. Thank you. She was definitely more than 2.
3?
Was she 3?
I can say this. I did look up the stats, and from what I found, it appears that 6 of SeaWorld's current killer whales were moved from their mothers, and most of them were between 2 and 4 years old when that happened.
Well, I don't know when did that happen. First of all, so I don't know the stats you've quoted. So it's fine. I don't believe what you said, but I can't dispute it. Okay? But what I can say is that the animals are doing quite well with the situation that we have, and that the animals have adapted and adjust very well to these dastardly movements. You know, it's like, you know, the Pacific Northwest, these animals stay together. Why do they do that? There is a very good reason. It's because they coordinate food activity. But what happens the rest of the year when they travel around? We don't know. We don't know how often they come. But they come back to the same area because they're feeding on the same food source. So is it necessarily the idea they come back together because they have to? Or, as I've pointed out, there are many different types of whales with many different types of social systems. They do disperse, they can adapt, and they do fine in our situation. So
Let me ask you this.
So again, a specific question, if you don't mind. And again, you might just not be able to answer it because it sounds like you're not too familiar with what's going on at Loro Parque, but Kohana was also very young. She was not 2, she was much older than that. She was about 6. So she's sent to Loro Parque. She's bred twice. She rejects both calves. One is already dead at 10 months. One is still alive, but after being hand-raised. Was that appropriate? I mean, she had no adult female to supervise her, to mentor her, to teach her anything. She was taken at a very young age, and then she was bred. And again, I'm just using the proof of, you know, it's an N of 1. It's only one animal, but she rejected both her calves.
yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. And I don't, you know, I wasn't involved in the decision-making process to send the animals to Loro Parque. And I do think there, you know, she was around other calves and had opportunity to see mothers and calves raise those animals. We have had other females younger than her that have been actually very successful at raising their calves. So it's not a one-to-one correlation. But in the case of her, that did happen. And is it ideal? Absolutely not. But fortunately, due to our expertise in handling and raising that animal, we were able to get that calf through that moment. And one of them is alive today as we speak.
Naomi, I got to ask. There's thousands of people in San Diego who owe their livelihoods to SeaWorld, many of which are directly affected and maybe dependent on the orca shows as they are now. Maybe that could change. Maybe they could evolve. If it is true that the orca show's demise would mean the demise of SeaWorld, could you look them in the face and say that was worth it if they lost their job?
That is a complete, beyond belief red herring. I mean, I don't think that's what we're talking about. So I just don't want to answer that question because that's not what I'm proposing.
Okay. What are you proposing?
I'm proposing an evolution in their business model. I don't see why they need to go out of business. I don't even think they're going to lose the killer whales right away. They would continue to be able to have these animals in captivity until they die. By their own calculations, that's another 30 to 40 years.
You really think the park would be as attractive without them?
There are Monterey Bay Aquarium is one of the most successful aquariums in California. It has no marine mammals.
But
SeaWorld won't know until they try.
But last year they had 2 million visitors. SeaWorld San Diego last year had 4.6 million.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a bigger enterprise. We're absolutely talking about a bigger enterprise, but Marine World Africa USA, maybe not 4 million, but still a big theme park, doesn't have killer whales anymore and is doing well.
There is a roadblock there that SeaWorld has, though, that Marine World did not have as much. So Marine World was purchased by Six Flags, and anyone feel free to jump in here, but they were purchased by Six Flags, and they slowly kind of stepped away from the killer whale market. But San Diego's SeaWorld has a lot of agreements with the city, one of which says that at least 75% of their exhibits need to be animal or conservation related. And so when SeaWorld talks about expanding, they say every time, every new exhibit needs to have this thing. So they're tied to that marine mammal.
And there's and I'm now asking just as a curious outsider who doesn't know anything about this agreement, you know, from the inside, and there's no opportunities for renegotiating that.
There may be, but would SeaWorld be interested?
Well, let's talk about unless you wanted to jump in, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. You're doing great.
All right. Let's talk about the breeding program. Okay, first of all, because I think it's very important as a part of these animals' lives. I think the ability to interact with juveniles, to reproduce, is sort of a natural one of the most natural behaviors and instincts that all animals possess. And I think taking that away would be a huge disservice to these animals for their benefit. Second of all, we have spent this time establishing, as I've shown, and Dr. Rose disagrees with me, a very thriving population of killer whales that is breeding successfully. And this is important because...
I didn't agree with that, but okay.
It's important because this is a model. This population is one of the only populations that can provide information that can benefit the animals in the wild. And as Dr. Rose mentioned earlier, the wild is not pretty. And it's getting worse all the time. And what's going to happen if we need to answer questions that maybe we don't even know right now, because as technology advances, new questions get answered. For instance, right now they're collecting feces from killer whales in the wild. Well, wouldn't it be great? And they're trying to make judgments from these feces about the significance of the hormone levels. Wouldn't it be great if you had an animal that you could collect feces from and actually measure and look repeatedly at what's going on from a from a blood sample standpoint and correlate it with the feces? What a great way to benefit the wild animals. There are who said we're not? Okay? You know, so I'm bringing up very valid, important points that can benefit wild animals, and I'm not trivializing it. It's very important, and I firmly believe that animals in the wild are going to be in trouble, and top predators are competing directly with us for food sources. And by having this population that is a model, it may prove to be essential to try and understand some of the problems that these animals are facing in the wild. So stopping the breeding program is a huge, huge mistake. Second of all, SeaWorld is not interested in changing the model of having killer whales in San Diego or anywhere else, period. We're open to suggestions about improving what we do, but we're not open to ideas that are non-constructive,
That answers your
non-useful.
earlier question.
Well, I do have a related reader question that they text message to us. That question is, Dr. Rose, how hopeful are you that the live marine mammal shows will be banned in California within the next 10 years? And I would sum that up as, what's going on with the state
AB
assembly
2140. The bill was referred for interim study. It is going to be reintroduced next session. That's the plan. The interim study has already begun, as far as I'm aware, but I have not been involved yet because I've been traveling. It's on one of the first items on my agenda when I return to the office next week to catch up with Assemblyman Bloom and start participating in that interim study process. So it is my firm belief that the Assembly committee that was responsible for the hearing in April, you know, basically up to that point, their main point of reference was a film, you know, was a documentary, Blackfish, and they want to understand the issues better. They want to have more basis, more foundation for any vote they take. And I was very much in support of that. So this interim study to me is really important.
When we wrote about this issue, a number of the commenters and people in the community would say, well, why not let the audience, why not let the market decide? If this truly is as upsetting as it might be, then people will react to it.
Fair enough. No, I actually think that's fair enough, and I believe the market will decide. I would rather it didn't take 10 to 15 more years because I think the animals are suffering now, that's all.
The breeding is the most top concern.
No, I think the animals, the 54 killer whales that are currently in captivity, I believe are suffering.
And that the sea pens would alleviate that.
That giving them more space in a natural environment in a sea pen situation with human care would be a vast improvement in their welfare, yes.
Do you want to say anything?
I have already read Dr. Rose's quote about her feelings about sea pens already. You know, there's no reason to go on that again. Okay. We can move on.
Do you have another one?
I do. Just a moment here.
You got questions?
One just came in. This one's for SeaWorld, folks. Hasn't the killing of trainers proven that these animals suffer psychological harm in captivity?
Absolutely not. You know, we're working with large animals, so there's inherent risk in working with any animal.
So basically, people shouldn't be concerned that this is going to happen again,
Well, of
or
course,
should they?
of course
Sounds
you
like you're
should be
saying
concerned, but we've had millions of interactions with our animals that have been safe. So unfortunately, yes, there have been some incidents, and we're learning from those. And hopefully that our safety practices will continue to improve and continue to grow.
Well, let's be, put it in some perspective. There's approximately, I should have given my statistics out because I'm going to get them wrong now. There's approximately 20 people a year killed by cattle. There's approximately 50,000 incidences every year with horses or injuries, and about 100 people killed every year. I mean, working with large animals is inherently dangerous. Everyone knows that. I've worked with elephants, I've worked with horses, I've had a horse hoof this far from my face. I've had giraffes trying to kick me as we're trying to do things from a veterinary standpoint. I didn't say I didn't blame them. I'm just saying that it is a risky job, and every time you go in there, you have to be aware of that, every time. And so it's inherently risky, and everybody knows it. So this is a choice the trainers make when they sign up for the job. This is a choice we all make when we ride our horses. This is a choice we all make when we go out and rodeo with the cattle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Susan, how has the business model for SeaWorld evolved over time? I mean, have you seen it change dramatically before?
You want to be a little more specific? I mean, it's a complicated business model based on moving people through a highly commercialized space, a very elaborately created landscape, and having them, move from show to show. So
I'm just trying to understand that question about whether they could handle a change.
whether they could handle a change.
Like being out, prohibited from.
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, it seems that they've handled the change away from having the trainers in the water. I mean, it doesn't seem like that crashed the system. And I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been thinking a lot about the landscape of SeaWorld here in San Diego. It's quite interesting, it's quite beautiful, and it's on a really interesting sort of piece of parkland. And I think that with a lot of creativity and a lot of thought, yeah, they could make a transition. And I don't think they have to make a transition to an all roller coasters park by any means. I think they could do some very, very interesting things with the physical buildings and exhibits of the future that they could potentially have. So, I mean, there's a lot of creativity and a lot of resources there.
Susan, do you want, I'm sorry, Naomi, do you want to respond to anything?
I was just thinking about the analogy of elephants that, I'll call you Dr. Robeck. I'm only calling you Todd to be friendly. I don't mean to be disrespectful. That Dr. Robeck made about elephants, they're only protected contact now in AZA facilities. They finally recognized that they were a dangerous enough animal to work with, that it required distance or barriers to keep the trainers and handlers safe. So I think that's where we are at now with orcas. The fact is that there are a lot more elephants in captivity, and so there have been a lot more incidents with elephants in captivity, and it took, nevertheless, the zoo community way too long to figure it out that these animals needed protected contact to be safe, for handlers to be safe. We have Christy mentioned millions of interactions, but it's not the number of interactions, it's the number of individuals that's relevant. There have only been about 220 orcas ever in captivity, ever since 1964, when the first one was captured. This is in Japan, Russia, everywhere. And at least 10% of them, and it's more like 15, have been involved in injurious incidents, not just at SeaWorld. SeaWorld has had the incidents it acknowledges, but there have been injuries and incidents in other facilities. And so that double-digit failure rate, if you want to look at them as cars, for example, we just had a massive recall of vehicles from Ford, I believe it was, and GM, for what I calculated to be a 0.00039 incident rate. failure, brake failure, or what was it? It was something to do that, was it with brakes? I can't even remember, but I was reading it every time.
I only pretend to know everything.
Yeah, okay, there you go. But it was some sort of mechanical failure that resulted in crashes, and there were injuries and fatalities of that rate, very, very low rate. And they recalled millions of vehicles. It wasn't the number of miles that these cars drove before they had this failure, it was the fact that they failed. So the fact is that we've had a double-digit failure rate, and if you want to look at it as a mortality rate, which there's only been 4, then it comes out to a 0.00037, which is orders of magnitude. It's still a tiny rate, but it's orders of magnitude higher than the rate we tolerated as a society for cars.
Well, I'm not an auto mechanic. I am a veterinarian. And I will say that I have had a little statistics, not much, but you know, when you look at incidence rates, you have to include numbers of interactions. And so if you want to get an accurate reflection of the incidence rate, you have to look at the total number of interactions. And certainly, I don't know about other facilities, Dr. Rose, what their, or Naomi, if you prefer, what their rate of interactions are, but certainly at SeaWorld from 88, we calculated conservatively there's 1.6 million interactions, and of those, there's been 7 injuries that have required outside care, and obviously the 1 death. So that's a 0.00000030215. You know, it's a very incredibly low rate, and so if we're going to go with that metaphor, you know, it's just you can't compare apples to oranges. And I go back to the idea that this is a voluntary job. People sign up for it. It's inherently risky. That's the way it is. And I think that at some point in our lives, we have to take responsibility for the risks we assume on ourselves. And we can't go around having people tell us that we can't ride a horse, or we can't go with the cattle, or we can't own a dog, or we can't own a python, or we can't work at a zoo with an elephant, or whatever you want to restrict us on. This is a choice that all the information is there and people make every day.
Well, I have a text message question actually about the whale's job. This is a question for Christy. You mentioned animals have the choice to perform. Please discuss what happens if killer whales decide not to perform in a show.
Sure. Well, over the years, one of the things that we've learned is how to communicate when behavior is incorrect. So as I mentioned before, we have hand signals to communicate a particular behavior. If animals choose to not participate, they simply won't engage in that behavior. Over the years, and because of all of our experts, we've determined that by pausing for 2 to 3 seconds, we call it an LRS, it's a least reinforcing scenario, we're communicating to the animals that they're incorrect, but with the killer whales, we reinforce them on a high ratio for accepting the failure. So even as humans, we know failure is a great way to learn, and of course, if we reinforce the animals for not partaking in whatever behavior it is, then obviously they'll learn, hey, I'm just going to hang out and not participate. But most of the time, the animals do participate. And if they choose not to, we'll pause for 2 to 3 seconds and we'll move on. And that's part of our job. We know each individual animal, and we're trained to look at the group, look at the social dynamics, and determine, was it a failure on our communication part? Is there something going on within the social structure that's the reason why the animal's not participating? Sometimes we bring animals out into a show and they don't participate at all. We interact and hang out with the animal, lining them up, rubbing them down, and interacting with them out in a show environment. It's one of the ways that we can vary what we do with them.
Let's be real, though. I mean, if a whale did, or a killer whale didn't participate, didn't do the show, they wouldn't eat.
Well, that's not true. Nope.
Let's be real.
No.
That's absolutely wrong.
Well,
I'm sorry you have that impression.
No, then correct it.
Well, as a
Each
veterinarian, that's
and-
absolutely unacceptable.
Okay.
I would be the first one to stand up, and all the veterinarians here in this audience, to say that's absolutely unacceptable. They have a minimum base they need for their nutrition. They get their base every day, regardless if they participate or not.
So the reinforcements, as you say, those aren't their main nutrition.
Moment to moment.
Okay.
It's not just food. We have
Fantastic.
well, no, it's a good question. We have a variety of ways that we can reward the animals. Food is one thing. And, most people don't know that we'll feed them all their food for that interaction and then interact with them in a show. So we don't, as trainers, we're very creative. We have strong relationships, strong bonds with these animals. We don't need the food. So for those of you that think that we're training based on food, forget it. Food has a very low reinforcing property. It loses its reward very quickly.
Well, they get their food no matter what.
Right.
And they know that. And they're intelligent animals. They're going to get their food. So they have to want to participate. We have to be smart enough to make it fun for them. Otherwise, they choose not to participate. It's that simple.
I didn't mean to.
No. It's unfortunate that you thought that, but it's a good opportunity to clarify that issue.
Well, when you interact as a normal person you see them getting fed, you wonder how else it happens. So I'm just trying to
It's a moment-to-moment issue.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, Naomi, is help us conceptualize this. You know, by your own mission, we're only talking about dozens of animals, yet there's tens of thousands of jobs. There's conservation efforts, there's scientific efforts, there's all kinds of impacts on our community, tax revenue. There's a tremendous array of impacts and benefits. And then when you look at the broader scope of animal issues of eating food, of eating meat, of protein production facilities, of all kinds of animal issues, why is this one such a big deal?
That's a really good question. There's a number of reasons. First of all, there's an ethical question here. You know, I do not want to take away tens of thousands of jobs. I don't want to do that. But if those jobs are based on a practice that I find is unethical, I think as a society we should work to figure out a way to repurpose those jobs. Right? Secondly, why is this so important? That's a really good question. We're only actually, in terms of orcas, talking about 54 animals. That's it for the whole world population in captivity. But as we just pointed out earlier, 24 million people or so visit SeaWorld every year, and 180 million people visit zoos and aquariums in general every year. That's a lot of people who are getting everything they know about these animals from this source, which I've already, I hope, explained that from my perspective as a scientist is giving out biased and incorrect information. So if you're trying to tell people a truth about what needs to be done in the wild, what needs to be done for conservation, based on lies, you're telling a lie. And they are not going to learn what they need to learn to care about these animals' habitat. They're going to think that by going to SeaWorld, they've given at the office this. I just spent $84 today to get in the gate.
Thank you.
You know, and so no, it's my job. It's my job. You know, and so I just spent $84 today to get in the gate, and I'm, being told that a great deal of that money is going to conservation, and it's actually not a great deal of it is, because it's a for-profit corporation that has shareholders to be concerned about.
We actually couldn't get that data, right?
We struggled, but we did find actually in a state assembly committee hearing that the SeaWorld San Diego president said that SeaWorld had spent $750,000 on its animal rescue program in 2013. And that pencils out to, I think, something like 0.05% of the company's total revenue. However, that does not incorporate other things that SeaWorld does, and we just can't, they will not release that information, they say, because they're publicly traded. I don't know if either of you...
I have all the answers right here.
In your back pocket, right there?
Absolutely
I thought
not.
in that binder somewhere.
Somewhere in here, it's got to be. I do want to say one thing. I think that the characterizing the for-profit is necessarily... actually, I want to backtrack. I'm sorry. I just want to comment about your ethical question. You disagree ethically, and that's wonderful, because that's your opinion. But just because you disagree ethically doesn't mean society has to change. We all have different opinions, and society is an amalgamation of many different opinions. And often the majority rules, and I think that people...
The market will speak.
I think that people, when they know the truth, how animals are thriving and doing well, and the benefits they can provide for wild animals, they're going to be as excited about them as I am. So, and that's my choice too, right?
It's your opinion.
So back to the issue about conservation, SeaWorld, because and we've had 5 different owners since 1989. It hasn't been the continuum, right? But despite all that, as a veterinarian and a scientist, every single time we have needed money to do something to buy facilities to go save an animal. Anything animal related, there's never been an issue about the budget or the checkbook. It's always given without question. In fact, my boss has said, we do the right thing, and we do.
I want to get.
You try working 7 days a week, pal.
I want to.
Actually, I do.
If that's the worst it gets, that's great. Let's, first of all, I'm going to have everybody give a last statement if they'd like. Can we give a round of applause to everybody for participating? And thank you to the audience. You were great. Even your heckled questions were good. So let's go around and last words from everybody, unless you don't want to. That's fine.
No, I think it's really great that this issue is finally being discussed. I'm not sure I'm on again. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and this just would not have happened, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago. So I think it's a sign of progress that we're just sitting on this stage, and I'm very pleased about that. And I do believe the market will speak, and as I said to you, Scott, I just hope it doesn't take that long, because it will take. Market forces are slow, and I honestly think the animals need help now. And so I just hope that the market speaks fast enough so that we can all constructively work toward an evolved business model.
What was your takeaway, Susan?
I guess my takeaway is how much, I guess I have two takeaways. One is that the animal rights movement has really changed and grown and gotten stronger in the last couple of decades, and I've been very struck by the outspokenness about these issues. So I think that's very interesting and very notable. A second thing I'd like to say is that brands change, and brands have evolved over time, and brands can also be hurt and be vulnerable. So, for example, recently Walmart and McDonald's have really been taking it on the chin for paying such low and mostly anti-union wages. The same thing is not untrue of SeaWorld as far as its the vulnerability of its brand, and also its anti-union and low-wage status as well for many of the people that work there. When brands don't jibe with reality, that's when they become vulnerable.
Well, as I said, over the last 26 years, I've actually been caring for animals at SeaWorld. And I've rescued, I've rehabilitated, I've given up a lot in my life to help SeaWorld's mission. And, I can't tell you strongly enough that they've inspired me. I'm one person, and my goal every single day is to connect with people so that they can help the wild population. I meet people every single day, and what strikes me most is the kids. And I think there's one aspect to having animals at SeaWorld that we really haven't covered here today, and that's that they do connect with kids. And I'll tell you, I just got a visit the other day. I won't mention her name, but I met her 4 years ago. And I happened to just randomly ask her if she wanted to come meet a dolphin. She's about 4 years old. And after the interaction, her mother grabbed my arm and said, "How did you know?" And I said, "How did I know what?" She's like, "This little girl is in foster care. She's been abused multiple ways. She's never been made to feel special, and I've never seen her smile. And I can't believe how much interaction she had with those animals." And it just shows the power that these animals have to create something in this child's life that she's never had, She's 8 years old now. I'm honored they come back every year to come see me and say hello, and she's a well-adjusted little girl. And it's because of those, it's not because of me, it's because of those animals that they make a difference in not just my life and not just kids, but everybody out there.
I think it's important to understand that everybody that works with these animals on a daily basis sorry, I'm getting emotional.
Wow.
We dedicate our lives to them. Wow. We are truly the advocates of these animals. Everyone that works there is dedicated to them. I'm so sorry, it's ridiculous.
Oh. Okay.
Absolutely, Dr. Rose does too. She's as passionate as I am. We just have a difference of opinion. Okay? And everybody that works at SeaWorld is their advocate of the animal that is part of their family, and these animals are doing well. And I can guarantee you that if they weren't doing well, you would have a mass exodus of veterinarians, animal trainers, activists. They would be with Dr. Rose, but they're not.
All right.
And I got to tell you, the reason I'm getting emotional is I'm thinking about my son, who was born 9 weeks ago, and I'd rather be there with him, but I chose to come here. I have actually a little picture of him right here.
Beautiful.
And, you know, the thought of him not being able to have the experiences I had, the emotion, the connection, it's horrible. SeaWorld is very important for the lives of the next generation. They're very important to keep this connection up. It's incredibly important for the wild animals. And if we can do a better job getting the message across, we'll take advice, but we will continue to improve, continue to invest in our facilities, and continue to make SeaWorld the best place to go to have experiences with these animals.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Don't forget with me. Thank you very much for coming.